Welcome to This Explainer. We're jumping right into one of the most insane financial disasters in modern history. We're going to deconstruct the fall of FTX and answer one incredibly specific question. How exactly does a $32 billion crypto empire just turn to digital ash in 9 days? At its peak, FTX was a $32 billion behemoth. It felt like a completely safe haven for over 1 million users. I mean, under Sam Bankman-Fried, they had arena naming rights, those massive Super Bowl commercials, and nearly $2 billion in backing from top-tier venture capitalists. It looked virtually untouchable.
But to understand the sheer, terrifying speed of this collapse, we really have to recognize that FTX wasn't just having a streak of bad luck. No, they were suffering from a massive, fatal structural vulnerability built right into their very foundation.
Section 1. A $32 billion illusion. Let's look at this facade of safety.
So when pitching to the public and to investors, FTX projected this rock-solid, secure image. But behind the scenes, retail investor funds were actively being funneled over to FTX's sister company, Alameda Research. And instead of seasoned Wall Street risk managers, Alameda was basically run by an inexperienced inner circle making massive, incredibly speculative bets with other people's money.
Later academic studies, like a major one from the Freie University Berlin, confirmed what many suspected. FTX was essentially operating as a completely unregulated shadow bank. They were taking in billions in deposits, facilitating these wildly complex transactions, but doing it all without the legal safeguards, without an independent board, and without the liquidity reserves of an actual bank. Honestly, they didn't even have a functioning accounting department. And look, when you run a bank without the rules of a bank, you are entirely defenseless against a bank run.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Alameda backdoor. This is how they were siphoning customer funds.
You might be wondering, how does that much money move without anyone noticing? Well, it was through a mechanical backdoor. Literally, a deliberate, hard-coded piece of software that silently siphoned customer funds. Users would wire their billions into an Alameda subsidiary vaguely named North Dimension. Then, Alameda just commingled those funds, using them to cover their own trading losses, buy luxury real estate, and pump out political donations.
Section 3. A House of FTT. The Great Collateral Illusion.
To really grasp the fatal flaw holding this entire shadow bank together, we have to talk about FTT. Invented entirely by FTX, it was essentially a digital coupon for the exchange. But, and here's the kicker, they treated this made-up token like a hard, concrete asset to guarantee actual customer funds.
The absolute absurdity of Alameda's balance sheet is just staggering. The vast, overwhelming majority of their multi-billion-dollar collateral was just FTT. They were heavily leveraging themselves using a token that their own sister company printed out of thin air. This structural flaw right here, this is exactly why the implosion was so unbelievably fast. If the price of FTT dropped, Alameda's entire balance sheet would instantly evaporate.
Section 4. The Fatal Bank Run. The Catastrophic Collapse.
Now, the crypto market was already having a rough time, but the real catalyst, it was a single leaked document. In just 9 rapid-fire days, we saw a catastrophic, total collapse of trust. On November 2nd, CoinDesk published an explosive article exposing that Alameda's balance sheet was almost entirely propped up by FTX's own token. Suddenly, the broader market realized this $32 billion emperor had absolutely no clothes. Then, the killing blow. On November 6th, the CEO of rival exchange Binance announced he was selling off $580 million worth of FTT. The moment Binance announced they were dumping their bags, the token's price plummeted by 80% in just 2 days. It was a complete death spiral. Because FTT was the main collateral propping up Alameda, and because Alameda had secretly borrowed billions of customer funds from FTX, this massive price drop instantly rendered both companies completely, functionally insolvent. The illusion was completely shattered. Terrified investors frantically scrambled for the exits, demanding $6 billion in withdrawals in just 72 hours. But the money simply wasn't there. It had already been gambled away on bad trades or locked up in totally illiquid investments.
The brutal reality behind why they froze withdrawals was this massive, glaring liquidity gap. FTX held less than $1 billion in liquid assets, but they had $9 billion in customer liabilities. Sam Bankman-Fried was desperately scrambling for emergency capital, but the books were so incredibly toxic that even Binance walked away after just 24 hours of due diligence.
Section 5. The Crypto Contagion. The Counterparty Cascade. The thing is, the FTX skyscraper didn't just fall on its own, it brought the entire surrounding neighborhood down with it.
Because of the deeply interconnected, highly leveraged nature of crypto, a mechanical contagion spread like wildfire. It instantly wiped out major firms that had lent money to Alameda or FTX. We're talking massive companies like BlockFi, Voyager Digital, and Genesis Global Capital. They suddenly found billion-dollar holes in their own balance sheets, forcing them to freeze operations and declare bankruptcy, trapping even more retail investors in endless legal battles.
On November 11th, the music officially stopped. FTX, Alameda Research, and over 100 affiliated entities all filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Sam Bankman-Fried resigned, leaving a massive, smoking crater right in the middle of the global financial system.
Section 6. The Legal Trap. Navigating the Chaotic Aftermath.
The immediate aftermath really just proved how completely non-existent their internal controls were. Adding massive insult to injury, within days of the bankruptcy, over $400 million was actively looted from the exchange in a mysterious SIM-swapping hack. It was a digital free-for-all. Eventually, SBF and his inner circle, including Caroline Ellison, were arrested. His top lieutenants pleaded guilty, testified that he directly orchestrated the fraud, and SBF himself, his famous $16 billion net worth was wiped to absolute zero, and he was convicted of multi-billion-dollar fraud.
They brought in John J. Ray III as the new CEO to clean up the mess. This is the restructuring specialist who oversaw the liquidation of Enron. He has seen the absolute worst of corporate America. And yet, he called this situation an unprecedented failure of corporate controls. This wasn't an accident. It was total, calculated negligence.
So, to wrap up this explainer, we have to realize that ultimately, FTX didn't just fall because of a market downturn. It fell because it relied purely on the illusion of stability, with zero of the actual regulations required to maintain it. It imploded so ridiculously fast because the entire ecosystem was built on the circular logic of a token they essentially drew on a napkin. Once the market saw the truth, there were no liquid reserves left to stop the bleeding. As the digital ash finally settles and the last gavel comes down on FTX, we really have to ask ourselves, will the financial world finally demand real oversight? What is it going to take to permanently close the back door on unregulated shadow banking? Because honestly, when you invent the money, leverage the money, and secretly spend the money, the crash isn't a matter of if, but when. Keep questioning what's really holding up the numbers on your screen.